Yeah, so this is just, I'm going to now go into a bit about James, who we have and who's greatly appreciated to come on board and deliver this presentation. So James has over 30 years experience and has undertaken projects in many countries such as UK, India, and Hong Kong across his range of industry sectors. And this would include construction, life and pensions, insurance, and the public sector. He's qualified with Prince 2 an MSP practitioner and holds an MBA in addition to a BSc, which is honors in geography and geology. So just for the agenda for today, I've already been through who's the Institute of Project Management, and James will be speaking to us about what is project management, why is project management an important consideration. Yeah, so then we'll be going into why is project management an important consideration for young people starting in their careers and in their journeys. We'll then provide some real life examples on what can make a successful or unsuccessful project. And then at the end, we'll also be answering any questions you may have. So feel free to pop those into the chat in the meantime, and then I'll compile them. And then we can, if you're welcome to speak out and unmute yourself and speak directly with the questions, or you can pop them into the group chat. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to James for the time being, and all over to you.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Nicholas, and thank you, Alex, for inviting me along today. So, I think as Alex has introduced, I've been around in the project management world for all of my career, and I've been very lucky enough to work in Hong Kong, India, and across the UK in a wide range of industries. So I'm hoping to bring some of that to you today, and some of those examples and some of the things that I've managed to do in the project management world over the last 30 years or so. It sounds terrible, 30 years or so, but as Nicholas will know, and Alex as well, one of the reasons I'm on here talking to you today is, firstly, you've invited me, and the second thing is really I have a great passion for project management and what it can do in the world. And I have two children as well. They're about the same age as you guys. One of them's just gone to university, and the other one will be going in the next year or so, I hope. So I'm acutely aware of the world that you guys are all entering into, and I feel passionately that project management is going to be a main skill that's going to be needed no matter what you do in your careers and in life. You will be participants in some way or other in project management in some degree, because we're in a constantly changing world and things are changing, and the way of getting things delivered is through project management. So my world has really been about project management all the way through. And so first of all, I thought I'd sort of try and give you a few definitions of what project management is, because I don't really know. Some of you might have a lot of experience in what project management is. Others of you may not even have come across it before. But I like to think of it as project is basically it's time limited. And the key definition there is the one at the top, really, is about a project is a temporary endeavor. So it's time limited, it's temporary, it doesn't carry on forever. And it's undertaken to create to create unique products, services, or a result. And it's more specifically, a project is a series of structured tasks, activities, and deliverables that are carefully executed to achieve a desired outcome. And really, the difference between project work and normal operational work is the fact that it is temporary and it has specific outcomes that are there that need to be delivered to a correct quality, which is defined. So basically, it's something that you will find in the workplace where people often get taken out of an operational environment and say, right, we want to make a really big change here, or we've got something new to introduce, or something is around the corner, a new bit of legislation's coming in, or it might be major, like the business is being sold off, or something like that. It's something that's specific, that is time limited. It's not part of the day-to-day operation, and it's where specific people or specific resources are drawn off from the organization to deliver something that is really, really important to the organization, or indeed to the environment in which they work in. So next slide, please, Nicholas. So as I said, for me, it's about why is project management an important considering for young people starting their careers today? And for me, really, it's about understanding what projects are about and why they're useful. So what I was trying to think about before I came onto the call today is if we think about something really simple that or break the whole concept of project management down to something simple. If we can all relate to something that's happened in our houses or at home, such as, for example, the changing of a kitchen. That's what I was thinking about before I came on the call today. I was thinking, well, what would you do if you're going to change your kitchen? And really, there's a whole load of things that need to be done in a kitchen. If you're going to change it, what do you want to achieve out of it? First of all, do you want to actually rip everything out and start again? Or do you just want to change some elements of it? You want to change the position of where you put the fridge or whatever. You've got to define what you want, first of all. And then out of that, you've got to then break down all of the tasks that you'll need to do to achieve that end result. And also, you need to consider, well, what's the cost of all this gonna be? Can I afford it? Or what standard am I going to achieve? Is it something that I'm going to do all myself and with my limited skills, or am I going to get expert craftsmen in to give me the most perfect end result? And then you've also got to consider, how long is this operation going to take? When do I need to get it finished by? Is it something that the family can live around forever or for a year to get it done? Or do I need to get it done in a few weeks? And so therefore, I've got to, I can only afford to take that kitchen out of operation for a short period of time. So really, it's about breaking down then that whole concept into a series of steps. And then what order do they need to go into? And then who do you need to involve? Do you need to involve electricians, skilled craftsmen, or do you have the skills yourself to do it all yourself? It's about what do you need? And that's really about what the project is about. It's about understanding what the scope is, what you've got to do in that period of time, and what money and quality are you going to get at the end of it, and are you going to get that right result? And I think really that can be applied to anything that you do in your life, really. If you say, what is a project? Is this a project that I'm dealing with here or not? It's about something specific. And I'd always ask you to think back to that, is think back to a simple example. And then what would you need to do in that example? And then how do you apply it to the problem you've got in the workplace? The next thing I was going to talk to you about, why you need to think about project management, is, as I said to you at the beginning, I think all of you will be involved in some degree in a role in project management in your working careers. So it's something you should all think about now. And then how would you prepare yourself for whatever role you might fulfill? So I thought about maybe talking to you about some of the roles that you might come across. So in project language, we have the top of the project is really the senior responsible owner. They're the project sponsor, the person that owns the project, the person that has set it up in the first place. So the person that basically wants the job done. It could be a senior director, it could be a manager, it could be anybody. But who's actually sponsoring this? Who wants to get it done? That's the first role, and you may find yourself in those positions. You might find yourself into that you want something done in the company, and you want to have something specific achieved, and you want this project, and you've got to set up a group of people to get it done. The next role, most important role, is the project manager themselves. Who is actually going to own the project and deliver it for you? Who's going to own all of this and join the team together and take the whole thing from the beginning all the way through to its final delivery? And then you've got the subject matter expert. So these are people that you would bring in who have the knowledge. So, the project manager doesn't have the knowledge of everything that's going on in the company. They don't have the expertise of the IT, maybe the finance, maybe what's going on in terms of the processing, all the specific knowledge. So for example, in the finance areas, they might not have any idea about what the financial controls might be, or whatever in the business. But they need to bring those resources into the project to make sure you're going to end up with the best result and you're using the absolute best knowledge that you possibly can to get the end result. And then, as I mentioned to you when we looked at the kitchen example, it's about what are we breaking this project down? How are we going to break it down into achievable chunks and tasks? And then who are going to do those tasks? And then we come down to people like the work stream leads. Who's going to lead specific functions? So the stuff that's got to be done, for example, on IT, we would need probably an IT expert who's going to manage that area of the business. He'll know all of the tools and the people he'll want to access to actually get those particular tasks done. You won't know all of that as a project manager, but you need to know somebody who can pull it all together. And then we've got suppliers. And these are people you're maybe bringing in from outside the organization, people who you maybe have bought software from, or you bought a new piece of equipment from, or you're actually bringing in consultants or other experts, whatever, and you want to use them, but you want to use them as part of the project. So they are key people that you're bringing in at specific points in time. In construction, for example, it's like bringing in a carpenter and you want him to come in and do the job at a particular point in time, and he just then goes away and you pay him, but he's performed a really vital part in your project. And then you've got stakeholders, and these are people that have an interest in the outcomes of the project. And these are people, they may be shareholders, for example, they may be other business experts or other links into the business that maybe customers, whoever, anybody who's going to benefit from the project, or they've got an interest in what's going on, is a stakeholder. And then we've got the end users themselves. So when you finish the project, you then got to hand it on to somebody. That, as I said, the project is time limited. You've got to hand it over to somebody. So it's about who's going to make use of what you've produced at the end of it, and have they been trained up in it? Do they know what they're going to use it for? How are they going to get the maximum use out of what you've got and you've produced for them, and handed it back into a business as usual activity? So those are really the main functions that you would come across. And really, as hopefully you're appreciating out of what I've said, if I've explained it correctly enough, is that any one of those roles you could find yourself in, and then to understand a project environment and what it means is really important. And if you don't understand how all those fit together and how they work together, then this is where projects and work starts to go out of the window, because people don't understand what their role is in life, or how that project is important to them. And then what helps a project go well? And also then what can be the potential pitfalls and red flags that basically cause projects to fail? Well, I'm going to go over to some specific examples when I'm going to bring you what I've done in my life, and hopefully bring some of it to life. But I thought it might be useful to actually set the scene as to what are the basics that make things go well in a project world. So really, it's all about, as we go back to the kitchen example, what the whole setting up, the whole planning is so important, isn't it? It's about, what am I trying to achieve here? If you don't plan it all, and you buy something, but elements that don't fit into the kitchen, or they're not going to match up color scheme wise, or you haven't organized the right suppliers to come in at the right time, so therefore you're going to be waiting for the kitchen units to be delivered before you can actually get on and finish off the electricity or putting the tiles down, and everybody's going to be waiting around, and then it causes you more cost because you've got to have people standing around waiting for other elements to arrive. If you don't actually have it all planned out and all sorted out, it's going to cost you a lot of money. You might not achieve the end quality, and indeed you might actually not ever finish the job. So it's really, projects are all about in the planning. What's going to happen? When do you need people? What do you need? When do you need them? What type of person? What skills, etc. So that's key to success, really, of all of this. And that's where the real skill of a project manager is. It's making sure that people are there and doing the work that they're supposed to do for you at the time when you need it done by, and to the right quality. That's what it's all about. And building those really close relationships so that you can depend on those people and that they will come in and you know they're going to do the right job for you. So really, when we set up a project, we actually have a business case. So what does that business case look like? Well, why are we doing this? Does it work out? We don't just invent it out of thin air. It's got to actually have a reason. Is it, as we mentioned at the beginning, is it to actually make that step change that we want to do in the organization in terms of bringing in some new IT technology? Or is it to make a change which is required legally? Or is it, so for example, you're moving offices or you've sold part of the business? It's about what are we trying to achieve there? Why what's the case? Why does it hang together? Why is it worth doing? And that's really important to understand that. And that becomes your benchmark all the way through. And if things don't improve, or they don't, or you think you're not going to achieve what's set out in that business case, then really the project should always be reviewed as you're going along. Are we really going to get there and achieve those objectives that we set ourselves? And then we come down to the whole issue of the project initiation document about what are we trying to achieve here. It sets out really the project objectives. What is this project all about? When are we going to achieve it and when? How's it all broken down? What's the plan look like? Who's responsible? Who's going to be involved? And it's basically a document which basically sets out the whole journey that the project's going to undertake. What's it all about? What's the scope of the project? And by the scope, and this is one of the biggest things that can go wrong, is people keep adding things in. So, well, whilst you're at it, could you do that? And by the way, oh yeah, no, I thought we were going to get that and not this. And people keep on adding things, the nice to haves, etc., which is why the project initiation document is so important, because it brings everything together and says exactly what you're about. And you can say to them, well, actually, that's not what we're here for as the project. If you want that to be done, then we have to have a change request. And then that has to be approved. We don't just throw it into the project, because all it'll do is just throw you off schedule, and also the costs will go out the window, and maybe you'll never ever get to the end of it, because people add in so many things that it becomes, something that's completely unmanageable. So that's why that document is so important. And then everybody signs that off. All of the stakeholders sign that off, and they say, yeah, this is what we want you to do, project manager. This is what you've got. This is your resources. This is the timeline. Right, we're all happy now. Off we go. And then also, we've got to make sure that the objectives we set are actually achievable and realistic. We call them SMART objectives, and we want to make sure that that's going to be something that we can achieve within that timescale. Because too often, some people get set up to fail, and that's happened to me a couple of times. People have said, "Oh yeah, just do that. This is what you've got," and you think, "Well, don't just need 5 resources here. I need 20 resources on here," and they never come. And then you're set up to them and say, well, why haven't you achieved that? Well, sorry, but you never gave me what I actually was promised it in the first place. So that's why I'm not achieving this here. And so unless you've actually got your coverage of the documentation and everybody's agreed to what you're doing, you shouldn't really even start, because you're already going to be set up to fail. So the other thing I was going to then go on to is, what are the potential pitfalls, failures? What's going to what should you look out for? So a failed project is really one that doesn't achieve its objectives, or a deliverable doesn't happen. So something gets missed, or the work wasn't completed on time, and then also the work just went miles over budget. So therefore, you won't have achieved the objectives in the business case, because you'll never get your return on your investment. Say the IT system you've put in, we keep on having to make more and more changes. It never doesn't work properly, and the costs go up and up and up. And then that return on investment you were going to get through that improved processing, it never gets achieved. So those are common reasons or project common failures. And then we go to the reasons for that. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it's about unclear objectives. If you weren't set out what your clear objectives are, then how did you ever know what you were going to achieve? Unless they're actually really clearly stated and everybody understands them, then projects can't achieve them. Another one is scope creep, and I mentioned that earlier about what happens with scope creep, and so I won't go over that again. Then there's unrealistic expectations. So people think you were delivering. It's amazing how many people just suddenly think, oh yeah, well, they were achieving that in the project. Leave that to them. That project manager's delivering that in his project. And suddenly you go down and talk to them. Is that what you were going? No, that's not what we were trying to achieve at all. And people start imagining you're delivering something that you don't actually, you never were going to deliver it. Another one, as I mentioned to you, is about limited resources. You never get delivered things that you asked for or were set out in the documentation. So the number of resources you get applied, or the number of basically everything that you set out in that project initiation document, some of it never arrives. So you don't get any legal help, for example. Well, yeah, but that was fundamental to my project, but nobody would, that resource was never assigned to me. You can't deliver that part of the project, so therefore all of that legal work just sits there not being done. So that's a common feature of what happens. And another one is poor communication. Job of a project manager really is about fundamentally making sure everybody understands what's going on in this project all of the time. What's happening? Where are we at? It's making sure the messaging is correct all of the time, and everybody knows where you're at. And if you've got a delay, you communicated it. If things change slightly, you've communicated and told everybody about it. And making sure also that people get reminded that they need to be available by a certain date. When they promise to be in the project, you've got to make sure they are coming. You can't just assume they're going to turn up. No, people need to be chased all the time. And really, a project manager goes around everybody all the time, keeping them involved, keeping them informed, chasing them day by day. It's not about trust. Trust is fundamental to the project, but it's about reminding. People are busy, people forget. And your job as a project manager, you own that project, and everything there is your life. And you want to make sure that everybody keeps on knowing what you're doing and that they've got a vital role to play in it. Another one is lack of transparency, teamwork. I've mentioned that's another common issue. Is about people forget what they're trying to achieve. Why do I need to worry about that project? What's going on there? What am I expected to do? And they completely lose track of what they're trying to achieve. Your job as the project manager is to make sure they understand exactly what they're doing and why it's important. Risks is another one. We always talk about risk. It's about understanding what could possibly go wrong. What do I need to plan for? How do I mitigate that risk? What can I put in place to make sure something doesn't go wrong? And I'll explain one of those items that went wrong for me in a minute. So basically, it's all really comes down to advanced planning. And the job of the project manager is to make sure that planning is in place and then you actually deliver against that plan. Next slide then, Nicholas. Oh, we got to questions. Sorry. Yeah, so I basically have got some real life examples that I thought would be useful to talk over with you. And please feel free to ask some questions at the end around each of these. But I thought I'd give you a bit of a synopsis as to some of the things that I've found myself in. And I've found myself involved in construction. So I've found myself in building a huge, great waste management facility for the Hong Kong government. Which is one of the biggest such facilities in the world, with a huge wastewater treatment plant, massive hole in the ground. And it was basically as big a quarry as you could ever imagine. We had to move all of the soil and rock from one valley to another, and then had to engineer it ready for all of Hong Kong's waste. And then obviously we had a lot of rain coming down, and had about 11 meters of rain a year, which is even in Scotland standards, that's a lot of rain, and it had to be engineered for that to that end result. And then another one I was going to talk to you about was an offshoring project I did, which was to move 400 roles from a life and pensions organization out to Bangalore and Mumbai in India, and what that meant and how that went. Another example was going to be separation. So, as you'll be aware, businesses get sold or they get absorbed all of the time. And I used to get a lot of work in separation and managing such activities after a sale of a business, or indeed if a book of business was split up. So, for example, you can imagine in a life and pensions world, for example, suddenly a whole book of business gets sold off to another company. Then you have to separate all of that off so that it can all go safely to that new business, which is a huge task because you've got all of data protection, you've got all of the financial regulations to comply with. And that is a major exercise in its own self. To managing all of that and to get all that to happen is a huge task. And another one, which isn't on the slide here that Nicholas has put up, but it's I thought I'd start off with it, which is about a huge IT program I did, which was to introduce a new IT system for 300 schools. And it's really is an example of where something went wrong, went badly wrong. Not, I might say, due to the project itself, but it's due to the end users. And it's an example of we talked about earlier about transparency, communication. So, for example, so we were putting in this new IT system across all the schools. It had to link in back into the county council that was putting this in. And the first thing that went wrong was the fact that the people weren't honest about the state of their data. So there was a whole data clean exercise that needed to be done before we even started the exercise. And schools weren't actually honest about what the quality of their data was. And so they just thought, oh, we can pick up the data from this system A and we'll put it into system B and it'll all work happily, but we don't need to put any effort in up front. So everybody went forwards thinking, oh, yes, we can move forward on this, and all the schools were ready to go. And then, sure enough, when you got it across into the new system, it suddenly caused all sorts of issues. Another one that went wrong there was the fact that some individual schools didn't set themselves up properly so that they could release staff to do their training. So they thought that they could just go, just turn on from one day to the next, or otherwise they could completely ignore the new system and it'll just happen, it'll come in there. And so they didn't release people for the training. So you're constantly chasing people for training. Think, well, hang on a minute. You need to, if you're going to want this new system in place, then you've got to actually release people for training. But people don't do it. They always view the day job as being more important than the future world that they're trying to move to. And so that resulted in those two things happening, in a lot of retrofixing, a lot of retro work, a lot more cost, a lot more anxiety for everybody, a lot more work for people. And it didn't happen everywhere. It was sporadic. But those places that did get affected badly were those that didn't participate fully in the project. They were just, shall we say, they just came along and they were nodding, saying, yeah, okay, we'll do that. But actually nothing ever happened. And then the consequences were really bad. So it's an example of where things can go wrong, is if you don't get the full engagement of the whole community. And, you will come across that where some people will pay lip service to projects, but they don't actually fully participate. And it's always something worth watching. And then you've got to say to yourself as the project manager, what am I going to do about this? I've only got a certain amount of resource that I've got. I can only do a certain amount of activity. I can only warn these people so much. I can only do so much with what I've got. And eventually you have to just say, right, this is going over the line and you're going to have to pick up the consequences. And then that effectively then becomes another project afterwards to retro deal with the consequences for those that haven't properly implemented things. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of some of the things that need to be involved as to why you might need to, what you need to watch out for. And then if I then go on to the one I did in Hong Kong, so I mentioned that I was built this huge, great waste management facility in Hong Kong for the Hong Kong government. That was when I started with my geography and geology career, and then applied it into project world. And it was a huge honour to do such a thing. I had over 300 people working on that site from 10 different nationalities. So there were people coming in from Australia, from America, from Pakistan. There was a huge range of France, UK. Yeah, 10 different nationalities we had working on that job. And then we had clashes of culture. Obviously, many Chinese local people working on the site as well. And but it was hugely exciting. It was a small team of management part of the project, but we achieved so much and we had such fun. But we worked really, really hard. But it was a lesson to me that if you get a really closely bonded team and everybody understands their role to be played in that, there's nothing that's more powerful than that in terms of actually delivering something that you're hugely powerful, hugely proud of. And we achieved this within the timeline, well within the timeline, and it's something that I will hold with me for the rest of my life as having done something as big as that. But it was the success of it all really was, again, comes down to planning of getting, you can imagine you've got to bring in certain contractors in from Australia at a certain period of time. If you get it wrong, then you're going to hold up the works, or otherwise you're going to have them sitting around on site not being able to do their work. So it's all about the timing, the planning, and getting people in at the right time. And that project was really about, I had a design phase, it had a build phase, and then it moved into operation, to handing into operation. And each of those stages was very, very carefully looked at from a quality control from the Hong Kong government. So you had people on site looking at everything you did, and it couldn't pass or you didn't get paid for it until each element of it was signed off by them. So you're under a huge process. Some of us have done a project management course at, sorry, I couldn't read what Emily's put on there. We'll pick it up at the end. So that's one example of a project I did in Hong Kong. Another one was offshoring 400 roles to life and pensions roles to India. And that involved a lot of work with regard to training the trainer. So we brought a lot of people into the UK from India to actually understand what the processes were, and to actually construct what the as is and to be processes will going to be look like when they moved to India. There's also the setting up of all of the IT, and there was also a huge amount of work of making sure that all of the regulations around the financial aspects for the Financial Conduct Authority were followed, to make sure that we were fully compliant when everything got going. And as you can imagine, that was extremely difficult, because you're effectively having people from India coming over to learn from people in the UK who were going to then lose their jobs. Hugely difficult to manage, and to make sure that everybody was bought into what was going on. And extremely difficult. But at the end of the day, people were very, very professional in what they did. And there was a very big phased implementation. So basically, we were training the trainer. So people were coming in from India, learning from the staff in the UK. They were then going back to India, and then training the workforce that had been recruited in India. And then we then fully mobilized them. They all had to then be signed off as being competent. And then there was the handover of the operation with the IT working effectively, and we moved on. So all of that moved ahead very, very well. And, it was for me, hugely motivational to see people grow in what they were doing from their first visit out of their country in India back into the UK, and then going back and then leading teams, showing what they could do, and adopting all of these very complex processes back in India, and then working effectively. So that was another huge example of, when you get a team focused and they're all know exactly what they've got to do and when, and it's well planned out in terms of the stages, the timeline, the sign-offs, the competencies, etc. It can work really, really well, and you can get to the end result and achieve all of your objectives. And then the next one, the final one I was going to talk to you about today, was about the separation of a business. So the company sold off 1,000-employee business, and really you had to then put in place everything that you needed to do to be able to separate that off and then get it working effectively in the new organization. So, for example, it covers all elements of the business, from the HR to the IT, payroll, processes, the operation. Everything had to be separated, and then not only separated, but the organization taking on that new business needed to actually be able to work it before it could all be shut down from the selling business. And there was a huge reliance on partnership with the organization that was buying the business, and to make sure that everything worked properly, and a lot of trust then had to exist between the organizations. And again, you're then operating in a regulatory environment, and also you're operating in something that has very, very strict timelines, because obviously from shareholder point of view, from budget's point of view, there's a legal point of view. So you've got contracts there where you've got to have completed this work, and usually in a transition agreement, there's usually something that has to be achieved in a certain amount of time. And the chasing of the organization to make sure that you can, all of the departments, so for example HR, to make sure that you can actually stop paying people on the right date, and that they do all of that work, and that they get exited from the IT systems on a certain date, etc. A lot of planning, a lot of trust, and also you're asking people to do this work in addition to their day job most of the time. You don't often get people allocated full-time to projects in all of these cases. They are people that you've got to build relationships for, and making sure that they can do that work in addition to their daytime work. And finally, also, you've got the whole issue of the compliance with the, as I say, with the finance for services authority, and to make sure conduct authority, to make sure that you are fully compliant and that data is protected at all times. So you've got the whole regulatory environment to be aware of all of the time. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour for some of the things I've got involved in my life as a project manager, and the different ranges of businesses that I've been involved in, from construction through to regulated finance businesses. And it gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the scale of things I've been involved in. But I don't want to just come from the project management point of view. Again, as I said, I really wanted to relate to you how important it is to realise that there are many different roles within projects, but the success of a project is not just the project manager, it's about all of the people that participate in them. And that if you don't actually participate in them with a open mind and willing to give everything to that project, then it'll not achieve its objectives, because it's all about building an effective team. So finally, I'll just say that for me, projects are hugely motivational because they don't really carry any hierarchies. So, for example, on many occasions, I've had directors or managing directors or finance directors who've actually led work streams, effectively working for me on the project as a project manager. So they might be way up in the organization, but they realize that they've got an important role to play themselves. So effectively, projects, you get rid of all of your where you stand and your status in the organization, and you come into something because you've actually got to deliver the objectives. The objectives are all about what it's all about. It's not about hierarchy. It's not about who you are or what you are. It's about what are you trying to achieve. And so the teamwork is what's important in projects. So hopefully that's given you a useful background to where I've come from and why I believe so passionately about it. And be pleased to answer any questions. And also, if you wanted to give me any feedback as to how this is it been useful for you, or has it been, have you all got a knowledge of projects and a lot of it was a waste of time? But it'd be useful for me to have some feedback. But I know. Oh yeah, the final thing was to come back to Nicholas really and what he said at the beginning about the role of IPM and the need to actually have the right tools and the toolkit available to you, and to have the education and to know the structure of what you're trying to deal with is really important. And so some of the qualifications that I've had, for example, in terms of Prince 2 or managing successful programs, etc. Having that background is essential, really, and I would recommend you to follow that, and that would help you in your career, and it also will give you the huge background and knowledge of why it's important, and to have that toolkit available to you. Over to you, Nicholas.
Thanks so much, James. That was really helpful, and I'm sure it gave everyone a great understanding of projects from the get-go. And it was great to hear about your experience as well. So I think we'll just go into the questions. I have a few questions for yourself, which will hopefully help everyone else who's in the call. And in the meantime, if everyone would like to post some questions into the chat, then we can deal with that directly after. So just to start out, James, I think the first thing is being a project manager or being involved in projects, the main thing is trying to stay organized as much as possible. And so, are there specific tools or calendars or scheduling that you use during your project management career which were helpful and can be relevant to students when they work with teams?
So I think that comes back to what my final point was about having the toolkit, which you get from the training from doing something like Prince 2 or managing successful programs, and then adapting it to how you work. So there's a lot of stuff that gets covered in these courses that actually you think, no, I don't really like that, or I don't, that won't be useful to you, or you adapt your own way. So a project manager will, for example, a key thing is their reporting of progress, risks, and issues, and how you're dealing with them, and making sure everybody's kept informed. I think I came up with that earlier on in terms of that communication, and being very clear, having something that people can easily see and understand is really important. And a project manager, really, their job is to make things as simple as possible so as many people can understand what's going on. And one of the tools that you do use in is called MS Project, but I don't. You can use it. I use it all the time, but actually, it's not really that useful for people in an operational environment because they don't know how it works or what it's used for or what it means to them. So a simple timeline and task thing within Excel is something I've always used because people can easily see what it is. So those sort of tools are very useful. So it's about boiling things down to something really simple, to the point, and not you really. So for example, a weekly report or a monthly report in a project term is really one or two slides. That's all it is. You usually squeeze it onto something like that, and it brings everything to visual in a very simple but very direct way that everybody can see what's going on, and that's really the key thing in running a successful project. Does it help?
Excellent. Yeah, so I think one last question before we go into the chat, and that would be if you have to deal within a team environment, whether a university student or in a big project, and you have somebody who's a bit difficult or isn't really motivated or involved to get in the project itself, and you have to chase them the whole time, what would be a few strategies, or from your experience, you've dealt with those scenarios?
Well, unfortunately, as I mentioned to you before, successful projects are about close teamwork and everybody playing their role. So if you're getting individuals who are not playing their role, you have to do something about it. So you either have to have them removed, or you have to find a way of motivating them in terms of hopefully explaining to them why they're so important. And generally speaking, I found that people will find that if they understand how important they are to the project, they usually perform and they usually come to the table. There are some people that haven't done that, and so unfortunately, you do need to. You can't risk the whole of the project because certain individuals aren't playing the game, and the game is probably the wrong way. But they're not playing their part. So yeah, it is difficult, and strangely, uh, some of the most difficult people I found have been actually the more senior people, and it's often because they don't actually understand how projects work, or the culture of projects, and or otherwise they might see a project as being a threat to themselves, and they actively go out to try and shall we say delay the project, or actually will put things in the way of it, or not cooperate. And so that is a very difficult situation, and you have to really try and find a way. But that's why you really have to have trust in your senior responsible owner, the person that actually has sponsored the project in the first place. They are key, really, because if you've got any problems going on and that sort of thing, you've got to go to them and say that actually this is something I can't control. This person or this department aren't actually cooperating at all. I'm going to not achieve your project for you unless you can help me sort this out. And so, really, that's something you need to escalate.
Perfect. Emily has posted into the chat here. Some of us have done a project management course at university, which focused on creating Gantt charts on an online software for planning projects. Is this something you come across a lot or use?
So, I think I mentioned that in the first question, is the fact that actually, yes, use that a lot of the time in terms of planning resources and in getting down to the nitty gritty detail. But in my experience, most of the time, I've then needed to produce a more simple version of that in Excel to actually give you the simple bar charts to be able to communicate easily to everybody. And remember, end users are as important as everybody else. So a common means of communicating at uh, at the right level is so important. So giving everybody a copy of a Gantt chart that's got so much detail in it isn't always the most effective way of communicating at the right level. So that's the word I would use, is communicating at the right level and understanding your audience. So for some people, they want to see all of the detail, what's happening when, da 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 da. For other people, that's not useful at all. So it's about finding that right level of communication.
Cool. The next question we have is, how do you see the future of project management with project managers and the growing implementation of AI?
Cool. So I think it's like any IT change, really. I mean, I think pro- I can only see project management as becoming more and more important, because AI is just going to be another major business change. The impact of business change. What's it going to do to processes? What's it going to do to people, the way people work? It's more change, isn't it? So change, by definition, has always been managed effectively through projects, because you're managing a step change. So it's about understanding what you're trying to achieve, and then how are you going to achieve those end objectives, and what are the steps you've got to make on that journey. So again, I can only see increased use of project management to help people on that journey, and bringing the right resources into making sure that journey is effective and that the change actually achieves the correct end result. Uh, so I come back to those first principles that we talked about right at the beginning of the talk today, is around making sure that everything is planned, the steps are understood, where you're going to try and achieve at the end of it. So yes, which is why I think we're here today, Nicholas, isn't it? Is about saying to you, actually, the structure of projects is vital in achieving successful outcomes.
Excellent. I think we've got time for two more questions here. The first being, you mentioned that an important part of project management is reminding. How do you do so without sounding as though you are micromanaging or over controlling?
I think that's, yeah, shall we say, it comes down to the individual. So, for example, it might sound strange this, but for example, actually it was actually in Glasgow that a lot of this happened. Was one of the companies I was dealing with. Was I noticed that a lot of people would not respond. A lot of people just never go to face and meet with people, and they just rely on email or whatever. And I always felt, in terms of the key people that you've got to build the relationship with, it's about actually, you've got to bring the personal part of it. You've got to actually visit people. You've got to look people in the eye. You've got to actually build some trust. It's got to go further than just sending someone a note or or whatever over the email or just facing somebody on a screen, such as we sadly are on today. It's to me, it's about building that relationship. So your key people in your project, you have to have so much more than just shall we say, a written relationship. It's about understanding what makes them tick, or you've got to know them. You've got to have a cup of coffee with them. You've got to actually. It's not about nannying them. They are the experts. They're the people that know all the stuff that's going to make your project successful. It's about finding everybody's individually is different, but you've got to actually build the personal relationships, and that would be the key thing for me.
Mhm. I think the very last thing for this event would be, what is the best way for students to gain real world project management experience while still in university? So I think I can answer the first part of that, and that being, try to get involved as much as possible and try to get into various communities such as IPM. What we do, if you'll notice, is through our newsletters, through our website, we're looking to produce as much information as possible as a resource to many people. And that would be the first step, is just trying to gather and learn as much as you can, build that foundation. From there, then you can start to look at the whole practical side of things. And that being whether it be volunteering or interning, that would be a really good way of getting involved and getting the practical in-team experience. And I know IPM is looking to launch a campus ambassador program, which is in the coming months. And that campus ambassador is aimed to give students the practical experience around being able to promote and distribute project management on your university campus. So you'll work with project managers, you'll work with other students around the world in trying to create awareness. And it's a great way of also not taking up too much of your time, but having that practical experience and doing that on a weekly basis. And then if there's anything you'd like to add in there, James.
Well, I'd look at it from the other end as well. It's about what in your personal life, about how you're approaching your work at university. Can you use project skills in doing so? So managing tasks or things you're doing in your lives, how can you use projects to actually start using that sort of methodology and that thinking? Because it's all about a way of thinking and a load of tools that you've got in your box that hopefully you can use. And the other thing I would do is to actually look around the world that's going on at the moment. Where are projects being used to deliver things? But look at what's going on in the news. Be aware of some of these major things that are going on, whether they're construction projects or some of you have mentioned AI, etc. Be aware of some of the things that are the big change that are going on, and read about that and see what's happening and how are things progressing on that. And that would be the way I would do it, and is being aware. We talk about HS2, for example, all of those big projects that are going on around the country, and it's about awareness and the way that things are being structured today and what's relevant.